One of the things that we see in the teachings of Jesus is not just what he said, but to take a careful look at the purpose behind what he said. We not only focus on the what, but we focus on the why he said it. After his resurrection, Jesus appeared to several of the disciples on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Not all of them were there, but two of the most important ones were, Peter and John. And when they were there, the Lord began to speak to Peter about his future. I'm going to read John 21, verses 18 and 19. This is one very important bit of instruction for Peter. He says, "Truly, truly, I tell you, when you were young, you would fasten your belt and go where you liked. But when you get old, you will stretch out your hands, someone else will fasten your belt, and take you where you don't want to go." Now he said this to show by what kind of death he would glorify God. Now, a lot of people forget this little encounter. They forget these words, but they have a big impact on a story that will happen later in Peter's life in the book of Acts chapter 12. The king, Herod, who is wicked and wants to persecute the church and loves the favor that he wins with some of the unbelieving Jewish people, he goes after Peter and decides he's going to execute him in the same way that he did James. And James was beheaded, so he was about to behead Peter. But Peter was told by the Lord that he would not die until he was so old that someone else would have to help him get dressed. So here he is in the prison the night before he's to be taken out and executed, and he is sound asleep. He's not the least bit troubled by anything. Herod was not going to be able to execute him. If he did, then the word of God is a lie. So this night, an angel came into the jail cell where Peter was bound between two soldiers, and there were two soldiers guarding the door. And an angel was somehow able to come in without them knowing a thing. And the angel said to Peter as he smote him and woke him up, "Tuck in your shirt, put on your sandals." He did this. Then the angel told him, "Put on your coat and follow me." Three things there that have to do with dressing yourself, the angel said to Peter. And Peter followed the angel out the door of the cell and eventually out of the prison, and he was out into the street before he realized that this was not a dream. It really had happened. Now, the people who were praying for Peter in a home at that time thought that he was a ghost when he knocked on the door. But one of the things that they had forgotten was that Christ had told Peter, "You won't die until you're so old that someone else will have to help you get dressed." That was God's purpose for Peter. Now, here's where we get into trouble, because God has purposes for different ones of us. For instance, we may know of someone who is martyred for Christ. In fact, right now, around the world, there are precious Christian people, North Korea, Nigeria, another terrible place, the Middle East. Christians are giving up their lives. China, people are being persecuted relentlessly and giving up their lives in many cases. But this is a purpose that God had for them. It may not be my purpose. It may not be your purpose. Just because it is the purpose for someone else doesn't mean that it's yours. We all need to be willing to die for our faith if we're called on to do that. But in many cases, that is not God's purpose for us. I believe that one of the great purposes of the church in some of the Western world countries, particularly like the United States, is that we are a fountain of financial resource to help send the gospel to the rest of the world. That is our purpose. When we cease to be missionaries, when we cease to fund the gospel. When we cease to tell the story, we are missing our purpose. Our purpose is not a bless me club for a small group of believers. Our purpose is to spread this good news. So God has different purposes for us. Now, Peter was ultimately crucified for his faith because that was God's purpose for him. But it wasn't God's purpose for him to be beheaded in Acts chapter 12. And by the way, his martyrdom had no bearing on his personal salvation. God had a purpose. You live a long time preaching the gospel. And Peter heavily influenced the Gospel of Mark, and Peter wrote epistles to the New Testament church, 1st and 2nd Peter, that have a big impact. Whatever your purpose, you can be sure that God will prepare you in how He is going to lead you. He doesn't call you a purpose without giving you the aptitude to do it. He gives you the grace for your purpose. Someone that knows our ministry and knows our church was talking about my ministry and my 4 children. And they said, it's interesting to see that not one of Pastor George's children got everything in his ministry. One is the pastor of a church. One runs his retreat for the pastors who come to his ranch. His daughter and son-in-law are builders, and his other daughter and her husband are into children's ministry. Well, these are the 4 great emphases of my life. And God gave one of these things to each of my children. Now, down through the years, I did all kinds of things. I had a camp, which was the largest movie town in the world, the largest Western movie town. We had 3 steam locomotives. We brought over 1 million people to an event there called Christmas Train. We have a Christian school. We've won over 25 state championships. We have academic excellence. Our kids get amazing scholarships every year. I've built 600,000 square feet of buildings. I've done all these different kinds of things. But when I started, my pastor put me in charge of everything. I was the janitor. I was the director of the bus ministry. I was also a bus captain. I was the youth minister. I was a children's minister. Not only was I the children's minister, I wrote curriculum for the other teachers to teach the children. I was the visitation director. And on the occasion when the pastor needed me to speak, when he was gone, I spoke in the pulpit as an associate pastor. I did all of these things. I didn't have time to get them all done, but somehow I found a way to make it happen. So it's no wonder that God called me to the varied ministry that He called me to, and He gave me a grace to do it. Now I see in my children, they are refiners. And here's what I mean by that. They focus more keenly on the areas that God has given them. Where I would give things broad strokes, they are very refined in how they approach things. I see it in my son Whit and the way he pastors the church. He's very refined. He doesn't want to take on all of the different things that I took on when I started our church and when I started our ministry. But he doesn't have to, because that's not his purpose. God has a purpose for all of us. The purpose for Peter was to be martyred, but not till he was an old man. Now, here is the Apostle John. And Peter was kind of concerned about John. What's going to happen to him? I know I'm going to die when I'm an old man. What's going to happen to John? So we see this in John 21. Peter turned around and noticed the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. He was the one who had put his head on Jesus' shoulder at the supper and said, "Lord, who is the one that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will for him to remain until I come, how does that concern you? You must follow me." In other words, he is saying to Peter, "Peter, my purpose for John may be totally different than my purpose for you. You follow me." So the rumor spread among Jesus' followers that this disciple wasn't going to die. Yet Jesus didn't say to him that he wasn't going to die, but he said, "If it's my will for him to remain until I come, how does that concern you?" Now this is interesting. John was the only one of the 12 who did not die as a martyr. He suffered great persecution, but he was not killed for his faith. Would he have been willing to? Well, let's read the story here, and I'll show you how I know, yes, he was willing. This is John 19:25. Meanwhile, standing near Jesus' cross were his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved, and John is really low-key about describing himself. He didn't say, when Jesus saw his mother and me. He said, whom Jesus loved. Standing there, he said to his mother, woman, here is your son. Then he said to the disciple, here is your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own house. It was Jesus' responsibility to care for his mother as the oldest son. She was a widow. But now that he's dying, he passes that responsibility on to the Apostle John. And from that day and forward, John served as Mary's surrogate son. He watched over her. He cared for her. He always made a place for her. Now, by going to the cross here, John showed a willingness to die for his Lord, but it wasn't God's purpose that he die at that time. Christ called John to care for his widowed mother the rest of her life. He didn't give that purpose and that assignment to Simon Peter. You know why? Because Simon Peter died many years before Mary. Mary outlived him a good long while. So Jesus made sure that Mary would be taken care of when he called perhaps the youngest of the 12 to be the one who would take care of her. And the Apostle John lived a long time and did not die a martyr's death. The cross that we are all called to bear is not a physical death in a dramatic fashion. It is a spiritual death of a selfish inner man with new life coming to take its place. Living for Christ, surrendering to his will, is an ongoing thing that we do the rest of our lives. We must never overlook it. But many times we wonder, would I be able to do it if I was told, deny Christ or die? How would I handle that? My first pastor addressed that question in the first few weeks that I followed the Lord, and it was a godsend for me. And I want you to listen to what he said. He said, if you can find the grace to live for Christ, you would not have difficulty dying for Christ should you be called on to do it.